Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation News right here on the Radio America Network, coming at you from the flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Henry David Thoreau wrote that, quote, "The youth gets together his materials to build a bridge to the moon, or perchance a palace or temple on the earth, and, at length, the middle-aged man concludes to build a woodshed with them. But what happens when even a mere woodshed seems beyond the fevered dreams of the country's young? With youth political dissatisfaction at an all-time high, an election just waiting for these same youngsters to deliver a decisive condemnation of a system they feel has left them behind, which way will they jump at the ballot box if they show up at all? And perhaps it's time to ask whether America's youth really sees a point in taking part in an election that, regardless of the outcome, they feel is keeping them from further and further from the all-important American dream. Now, all these questions and more on today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. We'll be talking polling of young voters, the barriers to entry of the Great Society, why Joe Biden's social media strategy is falling flat, and whether education in its modern form is even really worth the price of admission. It's set to be an epic show that delves deep and takes no prisoners. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. We'll be joined by Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner, political columnist, Joe Schaefer, and as always, we'll be talking liberty with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. It's going to be quite the show, so let's buckle up and dive right in. Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And what will this next generation bring? We're very fortunate to have with us today on Liberty Nation Radio, Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner, who has written extensively on what's happening with the youth vote in America today. Welcome aboard, Lisa.
Hi, Mark. Good to be here on LN Radio with you.
Well, it's great to have you. Now, people should, if they get the opportunity, and they really should make this opportunity, jump over to the page of LibertyNation.com and check out all of these articles, because there's such a huge amount of data about what's happening with this young demographic, this key demographic leading up to the 2024 election in November. Do you care to give us the cliff notes?
Well, you know, it's funny just hearing you say key, because in 2016, 2020, young people's presence were made known. Before that, it was, you know, every year they'd say, this is the year the young people are going to make a difference. And it wouldn't. But especially in 2020, I think the pandemic really, you know, the mail-in votes made the difference. And it was easy. They weren't at college. They weren't away from home. They could, you know, get their ballot and mail it right in. And just a ton of young people voted. And 75% of them or 80% of them voted for Biden. And today, I was looking at the statistics, and according to the latest polls, Trump and Biden are neck and neck with young people.
That's got to be a worrying sign for Joe Biden, and a message of hope for Donald Trump. I think that the fact that the youth of America are moving towards his platform rather than the traditional base, because there's that old saying, isn't there? If you're not a socialist when you're young, you have no heart. If you're still one when you're older, you have no brain.
Right.
I think that's quite
right.
a well thing. So you expect some kind of rebellious spirit amongst the young voters. You expect this, but perhaps before, being rebellious was voting for Bill Clinton. It was voting for Barack Obama. But now it seems, and I think I might have the right of this, that Joe Biden is pretty much as establishment as you can get. So the rebellion of the young, which is, you know, it's something that comes about every generation. There's the rebellion of the young. That would be more to vote for the person that the mainstream media is not telling you to vote for. That would be for the one who people are warning that this will be the destruction of democracy. And I think if one thing has become apparent, it's that the youth of America are not set on maintaining the status quo.
Well, there's a couple of things to notice about young people's votes. First of all, they're the people that largely are part of the burgeoning independent class.
Mm.
Understand what I'm saying? So they're the ones that are going out and registering as independents. So what you have here is you have young people registering as independents. They're not beholden to the left. They're not beholden to the right. So this doesn't mean that Trump has really picked up the whole youth vote, but he's gaining, and there is a shift. I have a 23-year-old friend who was always, in the left camp. As you were saying, the young tend to trend left. Well, I was talking to her the other day, and she said, I've had it with the left. I'm now a conservative, dyed in the wool conservative. I said, what did it for you? And she said, what did it for me was October 7th. I thought we were going to all come together, and now I see all this stuff, and I was thinking to myself, what is it that they hate about Donald Trump? And I started looking him up, and she said, I didn't find his policies to be problematic. In fact, I found that they were good, and she appreciated them now that she's been, living with inflation and stuff like that for 3.5 years.
Well, there's a really important point there, isn't there? Because there'll be some people who voted for the first time for Joe Biden, and there'll be other people who are voting for the first time this November in 2024. And so they'll have achieved their adulthood during this period, and the majority of which since Joe Biden took office. And so what you have is these youngsters, they've maybe cast their first vote, and that was for Joe Biden. And what they've seen is pretty much everything get worse. And, let's not lay the entire blame at the feet of Joe Biden for this. There's a lot of global issues that have added to this. But they've seen their conditions, the state of the economy, the state of the nation, essentially what a lot of people used to call a managed decline.
Right.
And so if that was their first experience, they think, well, I made this decision and what I got was a decline. At the very least, they're going to think twice about making that same decision again. If they're thinking, of course, they might think there's the more radical view that might think, well, this will continue and destroy the system that isn't serving me well, and then something better will arise from the ashes like a phoenix. But I think that's a tiny minority. But those who have voted in 2020, I think there's a lot of buyer's regret there among the young, and they can, it's not as though they can blame themselves. They can't say, I've spent 20 years voting for this one party and this is what I got. But they're at a point where, well, I've tried it this way, now I can try it this way. And I think that's what we're seeing to really create the leveling in the opinion polling that you were talking about.
Right. So I did a story yesterday on TikTok and how the campaigns are blitzkrieging TikTok. Now, this is interesting. Biden's been on there for a while. He's got 355,000 people. That sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Trump goes on there, and he's got 5 million in 3 days. Now here we are, a week later, he's got 6 million. It's just, there's some kind of mojo going on with young people and Trump.
It's funny, right? If you look at the videos and the content that people are putting out, I don't think that it's entirely that, well, they're getting dissatisfied with Joe Biden and more towards Trump. I think it's that Trump just puts out better content. It's more entertaining. The guy's a stand-up comedian when he's on stage. Right. He's funny. I mean,
he's more entertaining, and I think he captures the young people's interest, that kind of thing.
Yeah, whereas the content on TikTok is essentially, for the Biden campaign, it's essentially the same content that they've put cross-platform, which is very good for efficiencies because it means you don't have to redo something else for each individual social media platform. But it doesn't take into account the different demographics of the user base in those platforms.
Well, let me just add one thing. I talked about the young people becoming independents, but also young people in this day and age are less white and more diverse than they were, say, when I was in my 20s or you were in your 20s. You understand?
Yeah.
So if he's losing with Hispanics, you can see there's a kind of a crossover point where he loses with Hispanics and then he loses with young people because the young people are more diverse.
That's a point we're going to pick up on when we come back after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the youth demographic and how that's shifting away from the Joe Biden Democrats, more towards the independents, and also to some degree towards Donald Trump's Republican parties. Now, to continue this, Lisa, I think one of the most interesting perspectives here, something that you covered in an article on libertynation.com recently, was that you talked about how youth voters, young voters, vote for their own self-interest. Now, why wouldn't they? I mean, it's almost so apparent that people would be voting for their self-interest, but we don't look at it like that. And certainly the regular Fourth Estate, they're not looking at that. They're saying, oh, it's all about a cause. It's about Palestine and Israel. It's about LGBT rights. It's about this, that, the other. And they don't think, no, it's about self-interest. It's about what's best for you, for your wallet, for your future prospects. Why do we have this disconnect when it comes to specifically young voters?
I don't know. I think we discount them. A lot of research was done, and they found that this year, 53% of young people are most concerned about, well, let's guess, would it be, their college payments?
My guess would be just the overall state of the economy and how the job market they're going into is not setting them up for a successful future.
It's inflation.
Inflation. Yeah.
James Carville said that,
the economy's stupid.
The economy's stupid. I mean, I hate to say it, but it is. It's the economy. So the next thing on the list was at 28%, which is jobs that pay a living wage. And, so that's, again, it's the economy. They want homes. They want to be able to have kids. They want to be able to afford their private school if they want to, and they don't see, right now, they don't see Joe Biden as a ticket to that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Back in 2017, 2018, it was almost as though it was a buyer's market for jobs and for good paying jobs. You could go out in the morning. It was like the stories that my older family members used to tell me, where you could walk off a job one day and walk into another job that was just as good the next day, if not better, because people could pick and choose where they wanted to go for labor, to essentially sell their labor. But these, as you point out, under the Joe Biden economy, that's really not the case. Now, you could, of course, go to California to chase riches, as people have done since gold rush days, and then, of course, moved on to chase stardom out in California. And you could get a job for $20 an hour at a fast food establishment, which, of course, will probably shut down in the next couple of months because they can't afford to pay the state-mandated $20 an hour to everybody.
Well, that's what's happening. I mean, yeah. the 10,000 jobs have been lost in California. A whole bunch of chains are closing down. Individual, from Burger King to McDonald's to Subway, they're closing down restaurants. Well, $20 an hour is a lot to pay for minimum wage.
It is. It's I think an important point that people miss is the point of a minimum wage job is not that you raise a family and buy a house on a minimum wage job. It's to give you skills, to give you experience of working in an environment with other people. And then once you've mastered those skills, you're supposed to be moving on an upward trajectory. A minimum wage job, it's like the old advert, a dog is for life, not just for Christmas. A minimum wage job is for getting started in your work career. It's not...
part-time, you're going to college. I mean, I waited tables when I paid for my own college. And so I waited tables and I got my tips and I put it towards my education.
I sold junk from a bag door to door, and that's that's a job that I think few people could manage nowadays. So let's talk about the young voters, young people, and why there's this sense of almost disenfranchisement with what's happening in America today, because it seems that everybody is promised the American dream, which, and I talked about this in another segment with Joe Schaefer, Liberty Nation's political columnist, but it's very malleable in terms of what it is for each person. Is it a house? Is it a family? Is it a family with two cars? Is it a white picket fence? That kind of thing. It seems, I think, out of reach to many young Americans.
Well, it is becoming out of reach. I mean, when bacon costs $12 a pound, just simple things and Happy Meals and McDonald's meals cost
There
$12.
is no happier meal than a pound of bacon, Lisa.
Yeah,
Let's get one thing straight here.
that's very tough.
That is the meal of the century. I defy anybody who tells me
You got
differently.
to come over and I'll make my famous BLT for you, Mark.
All right, all right. Just
But
hold the L and the T and hold the bread while you're at it. I'll
the
take the
truth is
bacon.
everybody wants the American dream. That's why millions of people are crossing the southern border, the northern border, any way they can find to get in here. They want the American dream. And I think that goes in spades for our young people. And
Well,
they
that's
feel passing them by. And not only that, but we're spending all their money too.
that is that's right. 34 trillion. That is a debt that is not going to be paid. I see no way that can ever be paid. But let's talk about those millions of people that are crossing the borders. Now, young people, by and large, as a demographic, are more in favor of wider borders. Let's not say open borders, because very few people, I think, very few serious people, and that includes young people, are in favor of open borders per se, but
Mhm.
wider border entry. That's actually a barricade towards the American dream, isn't it? Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor, wrote recently that there are 6 million homes needed today to fulfill demand for the people that are already here. Now, if you're getting, even under Joe Biden's new border policies that apparently have collapsed already at time of recording, that's 1.8 million people per year extra. Nobody's building 1.8 million extra homes per year, and that's not including the young people coming into their majority and going off and wanting homes for themselves who are citizens of the United States. So there's all these homes needed, but with massive amounts of people flooding across the border, they have to live somewhere. So
Look, young people want homes and apartments and cars, just like middle-aged people and older people. Xing them out of the American dream. Look, how much have the interest rates gone up since Biden's been president?
yeah, so currently the interest rate is 5.25 to 5.5, which is 4 points up from 2019.
Yeah, and that is a
Uh,
big difference. I mean, that's money right out of your pocket that you're paying. You want that nicer house, you want that little bit nicer, bigger, roomy place for the extra kid, and you can't afford it. And I think the kids are starting to resent it, and that's another reason they're going to the ballot box.
yeah, it's not just for getting a house, is it? You want a car on finance, there's your 5% or more. If you want a house, there's your 5-7% mortgage rate. You want to use a credit card to buy groceries, there's your interest
Exactly.
rate. It's
Exactly.
the gift that keeps on taking. It's the Grinch that stole Christmas, that stole the American dream. Lisa K. Donner, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Are young Americans losing faith in the political system of the United States? That's a question that needs an answer, and there happens to be one. We're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation News' political columnist, Mr. Joe Schaefer, who has the answers for us. How are you, Joe?
Great, Mark. Good to be here. Really, really interesting topic. Can't wait to talk about it.
So this is great. You wrote a fantastic article on the page of libertynation.com called Young Americans Having No Faith in the Political System. Can you give us a brief rundown of the latest data on this?
Well, it was a Democrat polling firm called Blueprint. Yeah, you may have to look at my notes. Blueprint, May 29th, released a poll of young Americans between the ages of 18 and 30, and they were shocked by their own words at what they found, which is widespread distrust of American politics in particular, and the notion that America is ever going to get better. They see the numbers were 65% of those polled said that all politicians are corrupt. all politicians. 64% said that America is in decline and they don't expect it to get better during their lifetimes. And one of the quotes by the Democrat who ran the poll, what he said was, these people, these young voters see their country being led by deeply corrupt people. They have it's a total disconnect between young Americans and the establishment in Washington, D.C.
I think I can't remember who said it, but it might have been Mark Twain. It's the corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C. make the other 10% look bad,
Mhm.
which kind of plays into what the young voting demographic is thinking now. Now, they've got this, apparently, according to the polling, that they've got this very poor view of what modern politicians are. And there's 2 points I'd like to really dive into that. And the first one is that there's almost this idea of, I think it's called golden age thinking, where we perceive that the past was better than the present, and that the people were perhaps a little more moral than they are in the present as well. But I don't think that's quite right, is it? I think that there's been, if we look back through history, especially places like Chicago and New York, we've seen political corruption as almost it's endemic to the system, isn't it?
I really don't think that's what's going on here. It's not about looking back at the past and thinking things were wonderful. It's really people living in a system where outcomes are not working out for them. And the question is, and this goes back to so much about what we've written about in Liberty Nation, what I've written about. I wrote an article last year that I was very particularly proud of. I just thought it was an interesting concept about unpopular leaders being
Mm.
in the highest elective office in all the leading nations of the West. Justin Trudeau in Canada, Macron in France, Sunak in England, and Biden in America. Even the big box media, who is openly allied with them, calls them unpopular.
Mm.
Because you can't deny they are, and yet they have this highest office. And I asked in the article, how long can they hold on to that dynamic where they claim that they're defending democracy? They're unpopular on a vast scale, and the people they claim to represent do not feel like they are being served by these people. Well, this poll of young voters reflects that to a T. And how can you blame them? In this article I just wrote, I go through the things that they're going through. Why should they feel good about America? They can't get a house. That's complete home ownership is drifting away from young people. If you look at I talked about health outcomes, societal outcomes. 33% of young Americans, adults, are obese. I think a similar number, I think it was 38% I saw, are on some kind of pharmaceutical drug. Now, really, 20, 30 years ago, it would be unusual for young American adults to be on pharmaceuticals. Today, it's completely normal. It's a norm. And it's a very strange dichotomy that they're offering up here. I really do think that people are starting to wise up and saying the system is not for me, the system is punishing me, and why should I support this system? And young people, more than any dynamic in America, more any group in America, I feel, has a right to feel that way.
It's a very interesting point you make there, especially about how the the system the system that is in place, or the systems that are in place across these, let's call them the developed first world countries, I guess, and that they don't seem to be delivering on what people might expect. So, for example, in the United States, that there's some form of the American dream. Now, that's a very malleable thing for many people. That people define it differently. But if it doesn't appear achievable, then you have to ask the question of what happened, because it used to be an achievable thing. So is there some kind of um, modernist decline happening? And I want to also come back to the point you made about the world leaders there. And I remember that article that you wrote on pages of Liberty Nation News last year about the unpopular leaders. And I think it's very apropos for right now, because the G7 has just been held, and you've got 7 nations there. You've got Italy, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, and Japan. Now, I'm going to point out one exception there, and that's the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is doing incredibly well. She's very popular in her country. Her party, the Brothers of Italy, just stormed the recent EU parliamentary elections. And then you compare that to how all the other six leaders in this G7 group are doing so poorly. So, for example, Rishi Sunak has had to call a snap election, which the UK's Prime Minister, which he is on track to lose by, well, it's expected at best his party, the Conservatives, will get about 18%. The opposition Labour Party will get 40%, and Sunak will be out. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, during the EU parliamentary elections, his party finished third, which is pretty awful. Let's be fair, considering he's the chancellor of the country. In France, because of the EU election results, President Macron has been forced to call a National Assembly election, which means now he won't be booted out of office because he has a fixed term until 2027. But it could mean that he has almost no people in his party in the National Assembly, which means he's basically a lame duck for another 2.5 years. Japan's prime minister, so I'm doing all this from memory. Japan's prime minister just recorded his lowest ever approval rating. In fact, the lowest that any Japanese prime minister has had in modern times, of 21%. So when his party holds a leadership contest later this year, he's going to be gone. Justin Trudeau of Canada and his Liberal Party, they have not come first in a national poll against Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives since May 2023. So 13 months gone, and they haven't come first in a national poll. Have I covered everybody? And of course, I missed the obvious one. Joseph Robinette Biden. Mm. He may still win the election, of course, but all of the polling nationally and in swing states points to Donald Trump reclaiming the White House. So you have all these 6 out of 7 world leaders who are gathering together in Italy to determine what's going to happen across the world. And they're all so unpopular that many of them might not have either be in power or have any power by the end of this year. What does that tell us?
I think it's fascinating. I can't believe you just did that all off the top of your head, by the way. That was
I'm going to write this up for libertynation.com. Go and check it out. I'll do an article on it.
But you know, the important thing that, you know, I would hope these people would realize for their own benefit more and more that I'm more concerned for the nations of the West, but particularly America itself. There are worse things than losing an election. And I think that this poll of young people shows that. Having people opt out of the system, having people say, I don't believe in any of this anymore, is a far more dangerous scenario for the ruling elites than just merely being out of power for a while, because they've got so many ways to get back into power. But if you lose an entire demographic, let's say in America, if people don't believe fundamentally in what in the system of government, or and with good reason, they feel like been lied to, cheated. It's very fascinating to think about. A 35-year-old person in America today was 19 years old in 2008 when Barack Obama came in on his white horse, Mr. Hope and Change, and people believed it. They saw him as an alternative. And look how he turned out. He turned out not to be an alternative to the establishment. He turned out to be ultimate establishment. He's as establishment as any Bush, as any Cheney, as all of them. And it's there for anybody to see. How disillusioning is that for someone who was 19 years old and filled with excitement about, hey, this democracy can work for us. Got fooled again. And so losing that fundamental trust in the system is far worse for these people than temporarily losing their grasp on power. But I truly believe that, you know, I think they realize how unpopular they are, you know, what they have to offer, what they're trying to do, fundamentally transform these societies against the will of the people of these societies. they probably feel we can't afford to lose control, even for one election cycle. But as a result, what that's going to lead to is widespread distrust in the entire system. And I think that is such a profound threat to them. And so that is what they should take from this poll of young voters more than anything.
Joe Schaefer, thank you ever so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Today's youth want excellence, but are they getting that from the top-tier law schools for those aspiring litigators out there? And that begs a larger question. Is college worth the money it costs? I'm very fortunate to have with us today Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott Cosenza, to help us figure out those answers. Hi, Scott.
No to the last question, by the way. I'll say that. Hi, Mark.
So
Pleasure
you're
to be
saying
here.
college is not worth the money that you pay. Now, let's delve into that answer first then. Is it worth any money?
I think for very specific reasons, for people who want to go and be engineers or medical doctors or perhaps attorneys, it might make sense. But right now, there's 100% capture, it seems like, for most schools by the woke and progressives, and real education seems to have taken a back seat to that in such a major way. I do question it.
That's something
that
that Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA discusses a lot. He rails against the idea that college is really worth it, and that, in fact, he goes further and says it's a scam. Specifically, I think part of it is because students are forced to pay credit hour money for courses that are outside their chosen field. So, for example, courses on diversity, courses on certain civics subjects. And I believe in America, you're also required to have a language component to graduate university. Is that correct?
You mean a foreign language component?
Yes.
No, we've long since abandoned liberal notion, like traditional liberal. I mean, non-political progressive liberal notions of education. Liberal holistic, where we consider other cultures and things like that, and perhaps even Latin, Mark, would be required or taught. But no, that's long since been abandoned. Some of the schools, more advanced schools, do require a language requirement, but by and large, it is not required at all. I was just thinking, I presume you're the managing editor of LibertyNation.com, and well, I didn't make the decision to make you managing editor. I was consulted on the decision. I had been here before your onboarding, as it were. And I don't recall ever asking or thinking about where or if you went to college. It wasn't important. A generation ago or two, I might have asked those questions. And I think it becomes less and less important as time moves on.
Well, here's the idea, isn't it? That many of the young people nowadays who are finishing up high school, they are greatly encouraged to go to college and take a course, any course. And that's under the assumption that their long-term earnings will be greatly improved on a per capita basis for those who have gone to college as opposed to those who haven't. Now, I'm not entirely sure that's true anymore.
I'm sure that there is a word that economists use to describe this thing, and I just don't know the pocket way to describe it. But there's a thing where if you say, well, if people who have college degrees make more money, we'll just get everybody to have college degrees, and then they'll make more money. And it's the problem is that the people who used to make the more money because they had college degrees, there were a number of reasons that made that true. And when you just shove everybody through the college pipeline, expanding the pipeline, I think you water it down probably.
Now, you are obviously...
I say this as a college graduate. I don't think anybody's terribly impressed that I'm a college graduate. It's just not a thing, right?
So with your particular major, Scott, and we won't hold this against you, but you are a lawyer.
Yes, I have a law degree as well as an undergraduate degree. Also, that and $17 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks these days.
Is it really $17 at Starbucks?
I don't know. I don't go there. I can't afford it. I aspire to be able to afford it, Mark.
Well, that's because you didn't take a gender studies degree.
Yeah, exactly.
And that would have netted you a lot more in today's political environment. So here's the thing. Your specialty is law. Now, there's law schools nowadays. There are certain rankings that used to be thought rather important when it comes to law school. So David Latt wrote over at Bloomberg that these rankings are not really indicative of what's important to prospective college graduates now.
Well, he was writing about a study that was conducted. I'll note, by the way, that Mr. Latt is a graduate of Harvard and Yale, two of the most prestigious schools that we have in the United States. So for what it's worth, he wrote about a study conducted by some researchers, and the study basically said that short-term ranking movements in law schools did not affect applicants, the quality of the applicants, meaning if a law school dropped or gained a few points, basically the same level of applicant was still applying to that school, somebody with a higher LSAT score and a GPA. And so that may be true over the short term, but I think that there needs to be more study there for, to draw any long-term conclusions.
Well, I think the benefit of these elite schools, if we can say there isn't a benefit in going to college, I think specifically for law there is, because you kind of learn how to understand the law, which is a lot easier if you have a teacher. But the advantage in these top tier colleges is that it's not just the credentials that go along with it. It's the fact that you've accessed a network that has historical significance within the country and therefore within the law firms of the country.
So law firm or law school rankings have a lot to do with what the law schools were previously ranked and things that don't have to do with the quality of lawyers that are coming out of a law school. If you think about it, there are a couple hundred law schools in the country. It's the professors and administrators at the schools that historically are the ones who do those rankings. The idea that an administrator at law school, pick any law school in the country, that they have a strong notion of what 100 and other 99 law schools are producing and can effectively rank in between those schools becomes a bit preposterous. And I can tell you this, I went to the Villanova University School of Law, and we have won, the Villanova undergrads won 3 national college basketball championships since the 1980s, and each time the men's undergraduate basketball team won a national championship, the law school rankings jumped up considerably. Now, do you think they were turning out better lawyers because they had esprit de corps behind the undergraduate basketball players? Well, perhaps, but perhaps it has nothing more to do with other notions of reputation that, bleed across the lines.
Are you suggesting there's politics behind these law school rankings, Scott? And
inertia. The top 10 are going to remain largely the top 10, absent some huge move, to knock them out.
Like perhaps the top administrators in the college being accused of plagiarism.
Well, no, you're mistaking. That would only be if the people who were making the rankings thought like you did, that clean scholarship and an appeal towards academic endeavor rather than favored notions of race and class should control these things, Mark. You'd be mistaken, I think, to ascribe those views to the rankers. I think that it's actually the opposite. They may lose points if they start doing merit-based promotions and appointments at these schools.
Scott, in the wake of the COVID-19 debacle, what we saw was a lot of people moving online to do both their work and their study. Do you think online is the future for college educations? And also, should there be a cut in cost based on that?
Well, the markets don't control these things. I would like to see I think the market should control, Mark, and we can then see if there's value there for in-person or the value is remote, and let the market decide. And right now, the U.S. taxpayers and the buying of basically votes, I think, through subsidies, which are eventually, by the way, chains around the neck of the students, control these things. So let's get government out of the process, and the market will show us where the value is.
The market leads the way. Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Lisa K. Donner, Joe Schaefer, and Scott D. Cosenza. And of course, thank you for tuning in each week and joining us on this adventure. Thanks for being here. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.